Kia ora, Moeraki. This is a recording of the presentation which is going to be given to the Moeraki community at the meeting tonight. And this presentation has been recorded for anyone who can't make it. So it's just going to be a quick fire through of everything that's talked about. So as part of the presentation, a background to the where we are at currently with rabbit management in Otago, the rules, regulations, and what the situation is in Moeraki. Part two is a strategy for how we think a strategy could be put in place to facilitate better rabbit management in Moeraki. And part three, we're going to give you some examples of where this has actually already been done in Otago. So we're not making this up from scratch. This is something which is already being done around different parts of Otago, and we just would like to roll it out here in Moeraki. So just a background about rabbit management in New Zealand over the last 170 years or so. So this timeline shows that really from the 1800s, rabbits have been seen as a pest in New Zealand. And in 1947, there was a lot of central government funding that was put towards the rabbit boards to help landowners with managing rabbits. So I understand it was up to about 90% of the cost of rabbit control was actually funded by central government, and that was via the rabbit boards. In 1984, that central government funding was withdrawn. So lots of people talk about the good old days of the rabbit boards. It's just worth bearing in mind that actually a lot of the work that was done by the rabbit boards was actually funded by central government, and currently the ORC does not have that level of funding from central government for rabbit control. Actually, I don't think ORC receives any funding from central government. In 1989, the rabbit boards were disestablished, and that's because a lot of landowners said they wanted greater control about how they control rabbits on their own land. And a lot of the staff who used to be employed by the rabbit boards were then employed by the Regional Council. And the Regional Council established a regional services business unit, which acted essentially as a biosecurity contractor. So the regional services unit would go out onto people's property and would do rabbit control, but would send that landowner an invoice in the same way that any pest control agency would. So, until 2015, when the regional services unit was disestablished, we still saw regional council staff, out and about in the community doing rabbit control, but the regional council staff were acting in the same way as a commercial pest operator would act. And so that work that they were doing was not funded by rates. So there has been no rates money collected for the purposes of doing rabbit control since 1993. So any work that you've seen the regional services unit doing since then has been paid for by landowners in the same way that a landowner would gauge any other contractor. So that's just something to bear in mind, is that often people are asking, why aren't regional council out killing rabbits? Well, it's because regional council hasn't collected money from landowners to do that work since 1993. And when the Regional Pest Management Plan was brought out in 1996, that very clearly put the onus of rabbit control onto the landowner. So it is the landowner's responsibility to manage rabbits. So it's not ORC's job to come and destroy rabbits on other people's land anymore. And that takes us to where we are now, which is the 2019 Regional Pest Management Plan, which was a revision of the earlier Pest Management Plan. And here's the rules that we currently are operating under. So under Rule 6.4.6.1, occupiers of land must control feral rabbit densities to at or below level 3 on the modified McLean scale. So that is a measure of the level of infestation of rabbits on a piece of land. And it is measured by counting rabbit droppings, or the incidence of piles of rabbit droppings on a property. It's not about counting rabbits, because it wouldn't be very robust to just go and count rabbits because they tend to move. So it's about going onto a property and looking at the incidence of rabbit droppings. And so every landowner, occupier of land, must control, in Otago, every landowner must control feral rabbit densities to at or below level 3 on a modified McLean scale. So that basically says that the responsibility for complying with this role sits with the landowner. So it's up to individual landowners to make sure that they manage the rabbits on their property. So what does ORC do these days? Well, it states in the pest management plan that the role of ORC is to enforce that rule. And that is done through inspections and managing compliance. And also the ORC's role is in advocacy and education. So, ORC is here to try and facilitate rabbit programs across, multiple landownings for greater effect, to promote rabbit control and to educate people on what is the best way to do rabbit control. And the target for rabbit control in Otago under the Regional Pest Management Plan is sustained control. So different species under the Pest Management Plan have got different management approaches assigned to them. For some species, we are looking at exclusion and eradication, but that is not the target for rabbits. For a number of different reasons, the target for rabbits is sustained control. So throughout any rabbit control program, we're looking to achieve management of that population. It's not eradication. So Moeraki, so in response to some complaints from the area that rabbits in Moeraki are not being controlled, rather than the ORC coming out and just trying to target individual landowners, which we don't think is necessarily particularly effective, the strategy has been to come out and actually look at the wider area. And that is because pests are not a landowner problem necessarily, they are an area problem. Rabbit pests, they do not stop at fences unless you've got a very good fence. And so, we need to start thinking bigger picture about how to manage rabbits in the Moeraki area. So staff have been out in October. We had a team of biosecurity staff who went out and they inspected over 100 properties. And those were the larger properties, anything over 0.5 hectares. The staff came out and actually did an inspection to determine where those properties would sit on the modified McLean scale. So what score would they get out of 8 on the modified McLean scale for their rabbit populations? We also went around and had a look at some of the smaller properties around in town. So there was over 200 properties that we looked at there. And just want to reiterate that when we're doing these kind of area-wide programs, we're also approaching Crown land and public land in the same way that we approach private land. It's not reasonable to expect private landowners to do a lot of rabbit control when they are neighbouring an area of DOC land or Waitaki District Council land, if those agencies aren't also controlling the rabbits on their land. So everyone is being treated the same here. So what did we find? So we went out, did the inspections, gave scores to different properties in terms of their rabbit numbers, level of infestation, sorry. And this is what we found. It's quite tricky to see on this map, but up around the Moeraki beach there, along the beachfront, there was definitely quite a lot of rabbits in that kind of coastal margin there. Quite a high level of rabbit sign in town, on the shorefront in town. A lot on the Moeraki Point headland. And as we head down the eastern coast there, down towards Katiki Point, definitely on those coastal margins, the level of infestation is very high. We saw rabbits hanging out on the beach with sea lions. So there's no lie that there are a lot of rabbits hanging out in those coastal fringes there. Probably the reason why is because those coastal margins are adjacent to farmland. And so rabbits can hang out in the rocky or scrubby areas along the coastline, and they can hang out there and burrow and hide. And then during the day or nighttime, when they feel like it's safe to come out, then they hop onto the neighboring farmland and graze. So it's basically having those two kind of different habitats right next door to each other. The rabbits have got somewhere where they can hide out, where they can take cover, and then when it's safe, they can hop out into the farmland and graze. So that is why you're seeing quite a lot of them around the coastline. But there were definitely big chunks of land, even away from the coast there, where you've got north-facing slopes. So rabbits like dry, short grass, sunny sites. You don't find rabbits in swampy areas. They don't like wet grass. So when you've got a north-facing hillside, I'm sure some of you guys have driven around this area, and you've seen hillsides just littered with rabbit warrens, and that's why it's those north-facing slopes. So those were really the kind of two types of environment where we saw a lot of rabbit sign. It's those kind of coastal margin areas where they're adjacent to farmland, and it's in those north-facing slopes. So just to reiterate, of the 300 properties that we went to, about 40 of them, we found the level of rabbit infestation would indicate that they would be non-compliant under the regional pest management plan. And so we're following up with those landowners individually, and we'll get to that a bit later on in the presentation. So I just wanted to talk about different ways of approaching a rabbit problem. So, you know, what we've seen in Moeraki, we've got a high level of infestation in certain areas. A reactive approach would be to go, right, okay, we just need to get everyone together and we just need to do a big pin down operation, which is a pesticide. And so that would be the kind of knee-jerk reaction where you would go, right, we've got a crisis here, let's do some pin down and let's see how many rabbits we can kill. Now that approach is taken quite often in different areas of Otago, and then what happens is you might get some coordination amongst landowners and you might get a successful pin down operation, but no pin down operation is going to kill 100% of the rabbits. You might be lucky to get 90% in optimal conditions, which I suspect we don't have optimal conditions in Moeraki, but you know, even if you get 90% of the population, you're still leaving 10% out there. But with a reactive control strategy, you know, we don't really care about how many are left out there, we just care about how many are killed. But the problem with the reactive control strategy is that you're still leaving 10% out there, and that 10%, well, they breed like rabbits. And so it doesn't take long until that population bounces back, excuse the pun. So with a more strategic approach, we would start off with a plan, and actually a long-term plan of how to lower rabbit numbers and to get on top of this population in a more sustainable way. You know, how can we make sure that we get on top of and stay on top of this population rather than waiting until we're at crisis levels and just doing the pin down job? And so we need to start with a strategic plan. And so what we've done with the 40 landowners who have identified that they need to do some more control work, we've written to them and we've asked them, can you guys please start thinking about rabbit control? And we want to help you to develop a management plan to ensure that any efforts that are spent on rabbit control are, you know, you get the best bang for buck, that you ensure that you're not just wasting your time on doing a pin down job just for the rabbits to bounce back. And so what we would say in a more strategic plan is that, yes, sure, we can do a pin down job and try and get on top of the population or break the back of the population. But we really need to think about, well, how many rabbits are going to be left behind following this operation, and what do we do about those? And that is the way to deal with those that are left behind is with secondary control methods. So that's where you might come in with some shooting, dogging, mag toxin, habitat modification. We'll get onto that later on. And that is ongoing. So basically you've got on the left a reactive approach where you just wait until you're in a crisis level and you do a pin down job and walk away, and then you wait until you're back in crisis levels before you do anything else. Or we've got a more strategic approach, which is you might do a pin down job to break the back of the population, but then we need to keep going with the effort. And over time, the amount of control work required will diminish as the population becomes under control, but it will take time and it is continued effort. And you know, managing rabbits is just part of living in Otago. Rabbits are part of this, the landscape here. And so rabbit management is important for anyone who's owned land in Otago. So with the community session, which has been done tonight, there will be options for questions at this point, but obviously this has been done as a recording. So if you do have questions on this recording, you can email pests@orc.govt.nz, but we'll get to that later on. So what does a Moeraki strategy look like? So if we were successful in helping the landowners of Moeraki to adopt a more strategic approach to rabbits, to get on top of the rabbits that are running rife in Moeraki, what does that look like? Well, what we would like to achieve in the next year is that just helping everyone to understand what the rules and responsibilities are. I think there's a lot of landowners who are doing nothing about rabbits because they're still waiting for ORC to come out and kill the rabbits for them. And as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, that hasn't been the case for a long time. And so we need people to understand who's actually responsibility for rabbit control work now. We would like to see groups form. So rather than individual landowners just coming up with a plan for how to manage rabbits on their individual properties, we see greater impact if you get together with your neighbors and do things collectively. So if you are going to do a pinned on job, rather than you doing yours 1 month and then your neighbors not doing theirs till a month later, in which case the rabbits have just moved over, you know, working together with your neighbors for greater impact. Or if you want to do, we're talking about fencing, you know, rather than just getting one contractor to come in and do one property, if you can get a contractor to come in and do several properties at the same time, there will be cost savings and there'll be benefits in doing that. We would like people to be developing management plans, and for the 40 properties in Moeraki that we've identified need to do a lot more work soon, we are going to be requiring them to submit management plans. And we would like to see a lot more control work happening in Moeraki this year or over the next year. What would that mean for the following year? Well, if we've got groups working together to increase the impact, then it means that you know, the benefit being realized by everybody is increased. We'd like to see management plans being implemented. You know, there's no point in making a plan if you're not going to actually follow it through. And you know, with further fencing and pinned on and control work, you should see a population reduction in the rabbit population. And then from, you know, year 3 onwards, what does that look like? Well, we just still want the groups working together. We still want people working to management plans. We still want the control work to continue. And if that is the case, then the rabbit population eventually should be under control, and the amount of control work required would decrease, but it's never going to stop. You know, as I said before, rabbits are very much part of the landscape in Otago, and, you know, managing rabbits is something that is a reality for all of us who own land here, unless you live in an urban area, of course, or a swamp. So how is ORC going to help with this? So we're out here, education and awareness. So the fact that we're out here now, we're out here talking to Moeraki, we've been around every single property, and we're trying to raise awareness of the rabbit issue and trying to educate people on what is the best way to deal with it. And we will be providing technical advice on the different control methods. There's lots of stuff on the ORC website. If you just search ORC rabbits, you'll find lots of technical information there on different control methods. But again, we want people adopting control methods and doing rabbit control as part of a management strategy. It's not just about going onto a website and finding one method and just doing that. It's about thinking like, right, okay, what's my bigger picture plan here? ORC, we've been out there and we've identified those high-risk properties. So those are those 40 properties that are indicative of non-compliance. And, you know, we've asked that all of those property owners submit a management plan. We want to provide those landowners with help in developing those management plans. But, you know, for those 40 odd properties, they will be compulsory. And if we do not receive management plans from those properties, you know, we want people to demonstrate how they're going to achieve compliance within a suitable time frame. If we don't receive a management plan, or if we're not convinced that the work is going to be done, then we'll have to follow up with compliance work, unfortunately, for those properties. So this is what that compliance pathway looks like. So for those 40 odd high-risk properties, those properties that are indicative of non-compliance, basically, we've already done the first drafting gate, is where we filtered out these properties, those 40 odd properties. And then there's the second drafting gate now that we're going to go through, where, you know, we are asking those property owners, occupiers, to submit a viable management plan. And if that's done by a certain date, and we are satisfied that those landowners are going to do the right level of control work within an appropriate time period, then we can leave them alone. We go, okay, cool, we understand, you guys get it, you've got a good plan in place, we're convinced that you're going to implement this plan within a suitable time frame. Brilliant, this is fantastic. If you need any more help from us, give us a shout, otherwise we'll leave it alone. For anyone who does not submit a management plan, or we are not convinced that what they're going to do is adequate, for example, if we have a person with a large property with a high level of infestation, who just proposes to do shooting, we are probably not going to be convinced that's going to work. And we need to try and help that landowner to do further control work, or we need to follow up with compliance if we're not satisfied that they're going to do that. So if we're not satisfied that these landowners are going to do the right level of work within a suitable time period, then we'll follow up with further inspections in March, and that's when we head down a formal compliance pathway. We don't want to have to do that, but we realize that there will be a lot of landowners in Moeraki who actually want to go out and do the right thing, and they want to get out there and do a lot more work with rabbits on their properties and with their neighbors. But if they have another neighbor on the other side who isn't doing anything, then that can very easily undo those people's hard work and efforts. And so it's just not fair for those people doing all that work if their neighbors aren't. So we're asking everybody to come on board and to do this voluntarily. But for people who don't want to do that, unfortunately, we have to send them down the compliance pathway. So can this work? Well, here's some examples of what good rabbit control looks like, especially at a community level. We have a property here, which is an example in Gibbston, 4.9 hectares. And the rabbit control here is managed by the landowner. So this is an example of an individual property, but this is just what a property owner has to do in Gibbston. They have got a good fence around the entire property, and they've got a gate, and they keep the gate closed. It's really important to understand that a fence is only as good as the first open gate. And they do work within the property to keep on top of any rabbits that might have remained on the property since they put the fence up, or that rabbits that still might be able to breach the fence. So, you know, a fence needs to be well built, well maintained. But, you know, you're still going to get the odd rabbit that gets in. And we'll talk about what a good fence looks like soon. These guys also do magtoxin, which is a fumigant, which you can put down any burrows that you might find. And as a result, this is a beautiful property. So these guys don't have a rabbit problem because they are managing the rabbits, or they're managing any rabbits that do come onto this property. So, you know, they're really making sure that the rabbit numbers on this property are close to zero at all times. They are under attack, you could say, from rabbits which are in the neighboring land between them and the Koaraua River. And so it's important that that neighboring landowner, which is actually DOC in this instance, does a lot more work. And we're working with DOC to make sure that they do that, so that they so that the DOC's rabbits are not impacting on everyone else who's doing all this hard work. Here's an example in Queenstown in Lake Hayes, where there's a subdivision of 12 properties. And these guys said, rather than building a fence around each individual property, they realized it would be more effective and more cost effective to put a fence around the whole lot. So there is one fence and it goes right around the whole area, rather than lots of individual internal fences. And they've got a common goal of keeping rabbits out of the gardens. So here's 12 landowners who've got together with a common goal, and they're all working on that goal. They have told me that the rabbit problem, as soon as they put up that fence, the rabbit problem significantly diminished. The numbers of rabbits that were coming onto the properties and doing damage dropped off drastically. Again, because there isn't just that free movement of rabbits from like the scrubby habitat on the hillside out onto their gardens. You know, the rabbits just couldn't move around as freely anymore. And so the population started to die off. These guys are still doing a lot of work to get on top of the rabbits that were stuck within the fence. And it's very important as well that they keep that fence maintained and make sure that they keep an eye out for any breaches of that fence. But, you know, these guys are definitely on the right pathway for a collaborative approach to rabbit control in what is a very rabbit prone area. Pest-free peas and moorings. Again, here's another really good example of a community-led approach. So we've got a group of volunteers. There's only 10 of them in the group, pest-free peas and moorings, and they do rabbit control across an area which spans 130 hectares and 400 households. So no main feet, and anybody who's been into peas and moorings, you know, over the last few years would have seen the number of rabbits, but I've been assured that if you drive in there now, it's a very different story. And so these guys just go out every week, twice a week, they go out and do an hour every week where they just find rabbit burrows, they fill in the holes, and then they put some mag toxin in there, which is the fumigant, which kills the rabbits in the burrows. And so just by doing that little and often, they've really, really got on top of the rabbit population in Peas and Moorings. They do have defensible barriers in that they've got the Lake Johnston on the right there, and they've got fences on the other 3 sides. There was a little bit of fencing that needs to be completed, but that's being worked on. There is no gate at the entrance to this subdivision, but even in the absence of the gate, just with that little and often amount of rabbit control, they're really keeping on top of those rabbits so that they're not causing a problem. And so this is just a really good example of a community coming together for a common goal, and also about how, sometimes just little and often, once you've got on top of the population, that little and often effort just goes a long way to keeping the numbers low so that they don't become a problem again. So if you are now thinking, this is great, I want to do some control work on my property, what should I do? Well, we really do encourage fencing as part of any control strategy. We hear time and time again examples of landowners who will get a contractor to come along and pay a lot of money for that contractor to do a poison job or to do some other work on their property and kill a whole lot of rabbits. And then within a couple of months, all the rabbits are back. And that's because they don't have a fence. And I still don't know why the contractor's not talking to them about, how long the benefits of the control work are going to last in the absence of a fence. But honestly, in the absence of a fence, you really have to think about, is it really worth it? Is it going to make a difference? And what's my chance of getting reinvaded? Not to say that entire properties need to be completely fenced before you do any control work. Even just having fences along barriers or in certain areas or placed strategically along certain boundaries, or just certain parts of your property, anything that helps to break up the free flow of movement of rabbits between different types of habitats or across an area will start to help to stifle the population and just prevent that population from proliferating so much. And if you have a property, larger property, especially where you have a lot of rabbits, you really have to get on top of that population with something like a widespread poison job, for example, like with Pindone carrot. Once you've got on top of the population, then you can look at secondary control methods. So if you don't have a high level of infestation, it might be enough just to do a bit of fumigation shooting. So my property in Dunedin here, we've got 2 hectares of paddocks. We get rabbits coming on, but not very many rabbits. And just by shooting every couple of weeks, going out there and shooting, we're really getting on top of the rabbit numbers. If we had a high level of infestation, we'd have to start out with a pinned-on job to get on to really break the back of the population before we started to think about shooting or getting the dog out or any of those other secondary control methods. Pinned-on pellets is something which is used by some people and not very effectively. If you are going to use pinned-on pellets, please contact the manufacturer and go on their website for some tips. There's a lot of people out there with pinned-on feeding stations, and all their feeding is possums and rats. So it's all about how you use those pinned-on pellets. Again, when you're using any pinned-on, be very, very careful. It is very toxic to dogs. The carrot bait, a dog would have to eat quite a lot of carrot bait to get sick, but there is a risk. So just please bear that in mind. But with a lot of these toxins anyway, you need to be a controlled, a licensed operator, controlled substance license operator to use them anyway. So what does a good fence look like? A lot of people spend a lot of money on a rabbit fence and then it doesn't work because they haven't done a very good fence. So we recommend that the mesh that you use, there's lots of different meshes out there on the market, and it really depends on what you can get your hands on at the time. That the holes in the fence should be no more than 40 mil diameter. A lot of people put in fences with bigger holes and then the baby rabbits just get through. It must be galvanized wire netting. Don't use plastic. Rabbits can chew through the plastic. Also, the stronger the wire that you can get, the better. So, you know, stronger gauge wire. Some people use very thin gauge wire, and the rabbits just push that as well. In terms of height, I've seen rabbit fences around the place that were, you know, 300-400 mil high. They're probably pretty pointless. A rabbit can jump over that. So, you know, at least 600 mil, if not 900, would be great. And there needs to be some kind of skirt, or at least the bottom of the netting needs to be buried 150 mil into the ground. And that's because that's to help prevent the rabbits from burying under. You know, sometimes they can still get through that as well, but you know, it'll be less often. And so, you know, if you just keep an eye on your fence and look for any breaches and fix those up as they happen. Again, your gate, think about your gateway and think about, you know, when that gate is closed, can they get under the gate? You're using a trailing mesh or some other means to make sure that they don't get under the gate. And people talk about rabbit proof fencing. I say there's no such thing. There's, you know, rabbits can still get through some of these fences if they try hard enough. But the better the fence is constructed and the more regularly that you check it and maintain it, the less chance there is of you ever having a breach of that fence. And there's a website reference there to a publication which has got some guidelines on rabbit fencing as well. And so if you already have existing posts and wires, it's a matter of, you know, fixing the mesh to that fence. But you might be quite motivated to improve your fences, but maybe your neighbor doesn't want to borrow it. There is a Fencing Act which says that occupiers of adjoining lands not divided by an adequate fence are liable to contribute in equal portions to work on that fence. An adequate fence means one which is satisfactory for the purpose that it serves or is intended to serve. Now, I'm not fluent in the Fencing Act, but I've been advised that you can call on this to help to persuade your neighbour to share the costs of upgrading the fence for the purpose of rabbit control. Just bearing in mind, please, that this Fencing Act doesn't apply to land which is roads, national parks, railways, dock marginal strip, or Esplanade Reserve. So if you are bordering a road or bordering some dockland, I believe that those land, the agencies that manage that land are not obliged to share the costs of a fence. So if they do approach you with such an offer, I would jump on it. Right, so next steps. So those high risk properties that we really want to see those guys doing a lot more control work because we've identified that there's a problem. We've asked them to submit a management plan, and we are welcoming them and anybody else who wants to do a management plan to come along to our workshop, which is going to be held on Wednesday, the 24th of November in Coronation Hall. If you cannot get to that, please do get in touch with us for more advice. You know, if you want to do a management plan, then we are here to help you. And we really do want to help you because we want to make sure that people do this really, really well. The website, the email address to contact us is pests@orc.govt.nz. Please do get in touch. We're here to help you because we want to make sure that everybody is who needs to are doing these management plans, and that we see a greater level of rabbit control throughout Moeraki for the benefit of everyone who lives there. So that's enough from me. Thank you for listening.